Hi there, my name is Melissa Stevens. I work with Regina Public Schools, and today I'm going to speak to you about an approach to EAL instruction called Integrated Language and Content Instruction that you can utilize as classroom teachers. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me one moment. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on treaty land, referred to as Treaty 6 territory, and that the City of Saskatoon and all of the people here are beneficiaries of this treaty. Treaty 6 encompasses the lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are dedicated to ensuring that the spirit of reconciliation and Treaty 6 is honored and respected. This acknowledgement also reaffirms our relationship with one another and that we are committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. By the end of this presentation, I hope you feel informed and empowered to use integrated language and content instruction in your classrooms to support your EAL learners and non-EAL learners. There will be four main areas to focus on today. We will begin with a brief summary of the experiences and needs of EAL learners. Then I will explain what integrated language and content instruction is and its benefits. Next, we will discuss how integrated language and content instruction can be implemented in your teaching environment, and we will close with some of the possible challenges and solutions you may encounter when beginning or utilizing integrated language and content instruction. The reason that I have chosen to discuss integrated language and content instruction is because, as many of us are aware, the lack of funding for education leaves teachers carrying more and more of the burden without access to the proper supports we need to help our students be successful. I find integrated language and content instruction to be an approach that uses many techniques and strategies that teachers are aware of without expecting teachers to completely modify their current teaching methods. By the end of the presentation, you'll find many similarities in the principles of ILCI and your current teaching practices, so you will not feel as though you need to completely revamp your current teaching practices to align with integrated language and content instruction. So let's review who a student with an EAL designation may be and some of their possible needs and experiences. It is really important that we recognize that, as with non-EAL students, each EAL student is an individual and their experiences can vary greatly. It is essential that we get to know each student as an individual, EALs or not. There are two major categories of language learners in Canada. The first group is often who we think of when we discuss language learners, or our EAL students, newcomers to Canada. This group includes people who have moved to Canada for various reasons, such as immigrants and refugees. The second, lesser discussed group of language learners are Canadian-born EAL learners. And depending on your school, this group may include First Nations, Métis, or Inuit students, Hutterite colony students, Francophone students, and second or third generation speakers of another language. Canadian-born language learners are an often overlooked group, but each of these groups may speak another language or multiple languages at home other than English. We must consider these students when we plan our content and our lessons. EAL learners often experience common scenarios or situations. Many EAL students speak about the immense social pressures they face, from family pressures to academic pressures at school or peer pressure. EAL students often speak about how they can struggle to fit in with their non-EAL peers. Another common experience of EAL learners is the overwhelming amount of vocabulary they encounter. The words that we use vary greatly between social situations, and even in more formal situations, such as classrooms, we still use a lot of colloquial terms and slang. For example, I frequently do not enunciate the word to when I speak. Often I say it as ta. We are going to the store rather than the proper we are going to the store. As a large source of the vocabulary input students receive, it is important that we are aware of our own influences on our students' learning. When we are teaching our language learners, Especially those who are coming to us from other countries, it's important to consider the culture shock they will experience. The language, smells, and sounds, and even the sights may look extremely different than what they are accustomed to. Recently, I returned from a trip to Vancouver, and I'd spent time in Richmond. While there, I was able to gain a better understanding of how overwhelming this situation can be. Many of the signs were bilingual, with both English and Mandarin. But when we went to the Chinese market, nearly all of the signs, labels, and other language experiences were in Mandarin. I realized how difficult a task as simple as grocery shopping would be in a new country. The smells, food, and language were all different. I was very unfamiliar with most of the items that were for sale and would have had no idea how to prepare them. This was a very short experience, and even those few hours left me exhausted and overwhelmed. This is the experience that many language learners face on a daily basis. Cultural values are also another concept that can be easily overlooked. It is important to recognize our own beliefs as such, and that others are entitled to their own beliefs. In Western societies, we often focus on concepts such as individualism, freedom, and choice, whereas other cultures may favor concepts such as fate, uniformity, and conformity. In some situations, this divergence of beliefs may result in EAL students being labeled as having strange behaviors. But it's important to check our personal biases and beliefs before making these assumptions. As with all students, EAL students come with a plethora of prior experiences and knowledge. Our goal is to build the connection between their prior knowledge and help them unlock the information in English. Here's a short clip of how strenuous being immersed in a new language can be. This clip will hopefully help you understand how it feels to be a new language learner. While watching this video, I want you to try and figure out what they are talking about.
Parking here.
Natson.
Oh, hey, Natson. What's in a house shoe?
Padding.
Lining, panning, barbeting, de minimis, hein?
Anemonic. What's hard with the head node?
It's carpetable. Hash and Garts, actually. Tracy Paladin having it since like 4 day while I was a soap and an ottoman or something. It was palatable.
Tracy was a Normicon?
Yeah, Ashton part though. Mandolin, that older combing dorm dot. Yeah, that heart, the actual placency, and over it was draped like 6 or something. Strange me out, and it was palatable. It's chalked over now, but hey, did you wet her after it?
No, only stone pieces, bud pieces, and HP pieces.
What divided the acorn pieces?
Kind of part he's hoarding his packing. Is he having it older?
Older with a leak, yeah.
Right, I heard you wouldn't treat that without a Parkinson's.
Pour the Parkinson's is actually Lancaster. Shim was the part of it that I didn't want to open for, because, I thought the hand sticks was better, so did Corbin, but the phasing had a little baggish or something. It was palatable.
Did Storn?
Yeah, Corvish.
How Corbish?
Prison for me to bottom one of those bifence things?
Yeah, that's Corbish.
I know. Hey, have you seen any of those Paggarts screened out?
No, how does that suck?
Yeah. So it frames in a purtle or something, right? But there's hash fectins that rub on the same hinge. Those are tenation, subination, and exination, but the exination ships a little flowerlessly, so you can kind of like barbate it or something. Yeah, I thought it was ominous, but it shouldn't do that to sevens.
Why the sevens?
Because sevens are the ones that pillow every time taming was surfaced at enemy. Dude, if you don't plug it, you could ask. Plaques and Plaques, those are both undersided.
Sure.
Yeah, so are guys and sevens.
But the sevens had the head cut back.
Yeah, sure, but that was centile, this is markup.
Matt, it was centile.
Centile with an aim, yeah.
Sort of win. How's the carnival?
Shows out, he's white wiring now.
White wiring for what?
Carding pad? Parting dad? Something in the name. Strange me out, and it's palatable now. I have actually pamphleted it out like synonymously, but don't even get me a minus. The steak is donable. Wilting donable.
Really?
Yeah.
Wilting. Did you say the hominid?
Not, at least I don't chime it, but I think I gotta diet out.
So Corbish.
Wilting. I got an efficiency thing on 4 day, and a common harp on Don's day, but
A common on Darn's Day? Is it even hearted?
on the batching that it happens, there's something behind it.
That with an ash marine.
I'll let you diet out.
Sorwin.
Payment.
Later.
Did anyone figure out what they were talking about? I've watched this one dozens of times, and I'm still not sure. I could guess they were catching up, possibly making plans, or doing a work debrief, but nothing specific about that conversation. The creator of the short film explains many words spoken in the video are actual English words. But when put together, however, the sentences make little to no sense. While many non-English speakers can pick out words they recognize, they still often fail to make sense of an entire statement. The comments underneath the video were as enlightening as the video. Here were some that stood out to me. The first reads, "As someone who learned English as a second language, this is almost nostalgic. At a certain stage of learning, you can make out a lot of words, but it's not enough to understand anything. This is exactly what watching this is like." The next reads, "My little cousin heard this, and I asked, 'Is English?' to test since he speaks only Spanish. He said yes." Finally, "I swear to God, this is how it used to be when I didn't understand English at all. I would even pretend I knew how to speak it, and it sounded just like this." As I'm sure you're aware, many teachers have experience with language learners. At this time, I would ask you to take a moment to jot down some strategies that you currently use to support EAL learners in your teaching environment. If you would like, please feel free to share your ideas with someone sitting close to you. I will give you a couple of minutes to brainstorm. Thank you for taking the time to reflect. Due to this being pre-recorded, I had asked some of my coworkers to share strategies they've used in their teaching practices. These were some of their responses. This was not by any means a comprehensive list, but all of these are great ways to support EAL learners, and many of them align with the principles of integrated language and content instruction. Now that we've covered who EAL learners are and some important things to consider, let's talk about what integrated language and content instruction, or ILCI, actually is. Many teaching strategies and approaches that classroom teachers use are created by English speakers for English speakers, and therefore have fewer beneficial results for EAL learners. Larson, Freeman, and Anderson describe the problem often encountered during EAL instruction as when English language learners were put in regular school classes with native speakers of English, some of the language learners did not master content or English. On the other hand, when these students studied English first, their study of academic content was delayed, meaning that immersing students in a language is not sufficient for learning language or content. And teaching them separately caused delays in content acquisition. Gibbons explains that teachers recognize and acknowledge the importance of language in the classroom, but language is often the hidden curriculum within the schools, because language is viewed as the method of delivery for content rather than the content itself. ILCI focuses on bringing awareness to academic vocabulary used in all subject areas to develop the language skills and support rapid content acquisition. ILCI is an instructional approach that combines building vocabulary with maximizing comprehension of the subject matter at a rapid rate. ILCI is an approach to second language instruction that focuses on integrating content learning with language learning to support English language learners, or ELLs, in their academic pursuits. It is a collaborative approach to language learning that recognizes the value in the knowledge of students and educators. The flexible approach provided by ILCI encourages educators to adapt and modify lesson plans and units to the needs of their learners. A study conducted by Vanderberg, Perez, Renvolt, and Desmond in 2021 found that a combined approach of meaningful context-rich instruction with word-focused instruction provided beneficial results for language learners. Students who receive explicit teaching of language in one area of study naturally transfer their new language knowledge from one subject to the next. Forey and Chung also found that both teachers and students benefited from explicit teaching of language. Teachers benefited because explicit teaching of language enables teachers to clarify the tasks to share common analytical tools, to discuss language and structures of the texts, and to provide a diagnostic tool for assessment and feedback, which positively impacts teaching and learning. They also found that students have a better understanding of how changes in context influence the choice of language when they are exposed to explicit teaching of language. For example, many of our learning outcomes begin with demonstrate. A more common way that we may say this is show me. Demonstrate is the appropriate academic term. As educators, we have to have clear, explicit instructions and explanations for these new vocabulary terms. It's also very interesting and important to note that the story by Forey and Chung found that many students, including students without an EAL designation, saw an increase in math and science scores when a teaching approach using explicit language teaching, such as ILCI, was used for academic language. ILCI is an effective approach for EAL learners to ensure better understanding of academic language. By using ILCI, you will bring language learning to the forefront rather than leaving it as the hidden curriculum in the classroom. It is an approach that can be used by all educators in the classroom and other educational settings. Hopefully, at this point, you're thinking, this is great. How do I use it in my classroom? So let's talk about that. There are a few things we need to understand about language acquisition and planning to accommodate language learning before implementing ILCI in your teaching environments. To be successful in academic settings, EAL students must develop cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP for short. This refers to the formal language that's often used in an academic study with very little to no context. Whereas basic interpersonal communication skills, or BICS, are the conversational or social skills, sometimes called playground language, and the BICS skills are often developed in 1 to 3 years, whereas CALP can take a minimum of 5 years to achieve intermediate fluency, and it continues to be developed throughout a lifetime. ILCI focuses on developing CALP so students are more successful in their academic pursuits. Researchers argue that to be an effective teacher, it's not enough to know the content goals, or as we know them, outcomes. You must also understand how language is used in the content areas to convey information. As teachers, we are very familiar with content goals, as there are Saskatchewan curriculum learning outcomes. Language outcomes are similar to learning outcomes, but they're not officially mandated by our governing bodies. Language outcomes focus on the language needed to be able to understand the content. Language outcomes are often overlooked by teachers because they focus on the learning outcomes and assume language will develop naturally. To develop effective language outcomes, teachers must identify key language areas that will occur within the area of study. When creating language outcomes, the teacher must focus on how students will use the subject-specific vocabulary and language structures needed to correctly explain their understanding of a topic. There are 3 categories that language objectives can align with. First, academic vocabulary. These are key terms that are needed to comprehend and respond to the topic. This includes building subject-specific vocabulary, general academic words, or word parts. Next is language skills and functions. These are skills that students will use to complete the lesson, such as reading for the main idea or the purpose for using the language. These are skills such as summarizing and comparing. Finally, there are language structures, which focuses on grammar or language structures that the students are expected to use throughout the course of the lesson, whether it be written or spoken. Something like this could be using if-then statements. Creating language outcomes to complement your learning outcomes is an essential step in implementing ILCI. There we go, sorry about that. We are going to take a few minutes to practice using an outcome to create a language goal. Please feel free to work with someone near you or in a small group. Select one of the two outcomes on the screen and create a language goal. Just a reminder, language goals focus on language skills and functions, academic vocabulary, and language structures. When you create a language goal, consider what language skills or vocabulary students will need to convey their understanding and how that can be measured. I'll give you about 5 minutes here just to work through that. Thank you so much for taking the time to work on that. I have completed a couple examples, but these are not the only possible language outcomes. There are endless possibilities. For our first outcome, USC 2.1, demonstrate a basic understanding of how thoughts, feelings, and actions influence health and well-being. My first example is student will be able to match feeling words with a picture with 90% accuracy. This language outcome focuses on academic vocabulary and has a measurable standard. The second example, student will be able to use the sentence frame, I am feeling. This language outcome focuses on both academic vocabulary and using the correct language structures. For the senior outcome, USC 6.4, assess and demonstrate strategies used to identify and make healthy decisions in stressful situations. The first language outcome example I've provided, student will be able to sort images depicting choices as healthy or unhealthy. This language outcome focuses on the student's understanding of academic vocabulary. The second example, student will be able to explain why a choice is healthy or unhealthy using key vocabulary from the unit. This utilizes academic vocabulary as well as their understanding of language skills and functions. Vocabulary development is a major aspect of learning a new language. On average, between 7 and 16 encounters with a new word are required for gaining necessary knowledge. Explicit teaching of vocabulary is beneficial for EAL learners and non-EAL learners, especially in context-dependent situations, because the meaning of a word can change based on where and how it is being used. Vocabulary is only one of the challenges in learning English as a second or an additional language, but it is a big one, and it becomes even bigger the older the students are when they begin learning English, because the proportion of academic vocabulary increases with each grade level. There are many ways in which vocabulary can be taught. The best option for each class is dependent on the students within it. Generally, contextualizing key vocabulary by isolating several key terms that are critical to understanding the lesson is best, and recognizing that a deeper understanding of several key terms is more beneficial than a cursory understanding of a dozen. Here are some examples of ways that you can help develop vocabulary in your classroom. Word walls. They are an excellent way to incorporate key terms from the unit. The word walls that we're discussing today focus on key words of the unit with either pictures, synonyms, or a definition, as opposed to an alphabetical word wall that many of us are familiar with. Personal dictionaries are also a great option for language learners to be involved in their own learning. They can record information in their first language, draw pictures, use the words in a sentence, define it, or any combination of these that work for them. Concept definition maps can help vocabulary development by deepening their understanding of the key concepts. As with personal dictionaries, pictures, summaries, comparisons, and examples can all be used based on the needs of the student and the requirements of the lesson. It's important to note that the use of a student's first language should not be discouraged, as ILCI encourages building connections between the student's first language and English to unlock their prior knowledge. Word generation activities, such as this one, are based on the unit being taught. It requires students to recall what they have learned and demonstrate their understanding by sorting into like categories. This example is based on the American Revolution, but it does an excellent job of showing a well-executed word generation activity. Word sorts can be used for phonological awareness or identifying words in a unit with similar with similar endings, beginnings, or blends. Class discussions are one of the most powerful tools that we can use in our classrooms. Students often feel safest with peers and less worried about making mistakes or asking questions in front of smaller groups. Students can also learn many things from their peers and deepen their understanding of both language and content. Class discussions can range in size from pairs to whole groups based on the needs of your learners and the lesson. Closed sentence activities work to practice correct language while checking for understanding in a lower pressure situation. Students do not have to be concerned about sounding out words aloud or using the correct tense. Reinforcing vocabulary throughout the lesson and unit is essential for language development, as it's been shown that multiple opportunities to practice new vocabulary over a period of time is more effective than concentrated, shorter lessons. Allocating time for the studying and reviewing of vocabulary when planning a lesson or a unit is a necessary aspect of teaching through an ILCI approach. It's important that we activate students' prior knowledge. Activating prior knowledge enables language learners to connect new learning to prior knowledge and experiences. This helps ELLs to learn the language they need to express their understanding and experiences they have in their first language. Many ELLs arrive at school with a plethora of prior knowledge and experiences that just need to be unlocked by making connections between the topic and their knowledge in their first language. In the subject area of math, many ELLs are familiar with a wide range of whole numbers in their first language. But when observing a verbal math lesson in English, they can become overwhelmed by the language load and fail to make the connection between the number 3 and the equivalent word in their first language. By using visuals, manipulatives, collaborative discussions, and repetitions, teachers can support ELLs in making essential connections between their prior knowledge and new learning concepts. Making connections to previous concepts learned in the class is also important. Some students will not automatically connect new learning concepts with concepts that have previously been taught and benefit from the teacher explicitly pointing out those connections. Building on prior knowledge supports scaffolding for learning new concepts. And everybody's favorite part, assessment. Assessment is a concept that us educators are all familiar with, and we recognize it's an important part of an effective teaching cycle. Assessment is not the end goal, but rather a step in the continuous process that informs us on what needs to be modified and retaught to ensure comprehension of our content. There are 5 major principles of language assessment: practicality, reliability, validity, authenticity, and feedback. When providing an assessment for a language learner, one should ask, first, is it reasonable within financial, time, scoring, and test administration restraints? Is this assessment practical? Next, is the assessment consistent and dependable? Is it a reliable assessment? Also, does this assessment measure what it is intended to measure in the content area and instruction? Is this a valid assessment? Next, does this assessment have real-world application? Is it authentic? Finally, will students receive information back about their competence or skill level in this area? Will they receive any viable feedback? Many standardized tests fail to account for cultural knowledge and experiences. In classrooms, we're able to use or create assessments that more accurately evaluate our students' understanding of the concepts. There are a variety of assessment alternatives to traditional tests. Assessments should be formative and ongoing, with opportunities for open-ended, creative answers that are oriented towards the learning process. Researchers recommend using an assessment with sufficient time and adapting assessments to ensure that language learners are not penalized for language errors when you are assessing the content knowledge. In an ILCI approach, it's recommended that assessments be used in a formative application as a tool to inform teachers of students' progress and to allow them to modify their lessons and reteach concepts as required to meet the needs of their learners. I want to take a moment to draw your attention to the sheet you received titled Lesson Planning Guide Following ILCI Principles. There has been a lot of information throughout this presentation, and this double-sided sheet can help you when planning a lesson. It breaks down the larger tasks into small, manageable checkpoints to ensure that you're following the principles we have talked about today. Realistically, we understand that any time you implement a new lesson, unit, approach, or teaching strategy, there will be challenges. As teachers, it's important to recognize this before we start and work to address these challenges. Anytime we implement something new, it can be overwhelming. To combat this, I would recommend working collaboratively with your coworkers to plan lessons. Whether it be within the school or with other teachers from outside the school, working with similar grade teachers can help connect units within a class or grade level, and it can help build on the previous learning students have learned in prior years. One school that I've worked at allotted PLC time or buddy time. We were paired a junior teacher with a senior teacher. For example, as the 2-3 teacher, I was paired with the 5-6 teacher. I would plan buddy time and be responsible for both classes 1 hour every other week. Let's call it week A. And while I was monitoring the buddy time on week A, the 5-6 teacher was attending the PLC meetings related to senior grade topics and issues with other senior teachers in the school. The following week, week B, I would attend the junior PLC with other junior teachers, and the 5-6 teacher was responsible for our 2 classes during buddy time. This PLC time was used to help teachers work collaboratively with your grade groups. Another challenge you may face is the wide range of English proficiency in your classroom. Sadly, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to this, but it is essential that you use any assessments provided to you and your best assessment practices to inform your teaching. Also, don't forget, you have access to a plethora of resources within your division. This includes the EAL specialists. Even if your school does not have one specifically assigned to your building, there should be someone in your division that has EAL specialization. Talk to your administration about what resources you have if you don't have easy access to an EAL specialist. It's important to remember that you are not alone. As EAL specialists, our goal is to support EAL learners, which also includes supporting the classroom teachers to ensure they feel confident in their classrooms. Before we go, I know you have listened to a lot of information. I've provided you with a summary sheet of some of the key information in this presentation as a quick reference guide. To summarize, our language learners are a diverse group of learners with diverse needs. There can be similarities and differences between each student. Make sure to get to know your learners as individuals. Also, ILCI is not a magical approach that will work the same for every person. Use your assessments to inform and modify your teaching approaches and lesson plans, and encourage your students to use their first language and build those connections between their first language and the topics you're teaching. ILCI uses multiple strategies to inform your teaching, and do not hesitate to use the lesson planning guide or other resources to support yourself and your students. The key terms from this presentation have been included on the slides and your summary sheet. We have basic interpersonal communication skills, or BICS, your playground language. We also have cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP, your academic language. We have content outcomes, which are also our content goals or the curriculum. Integrated language and content instruction, ILCI. Language outcomes or language goals, our hidden curriculum that we're bringing to the forefront using ILCI. If you would like to do some more independent research on this topic, I've provided the resources I used to create this presentation, and there are many excellent resources to learn more about ILCI in depth. Here are also the links to the digital copies of these handouts provided today. I've included my email on the slideshow, but it's also found on the summary sheet if you have any questions about the presentation or ILCI. Thank you so much for your time today and all of your dedication to supporting the language learners in your teaching spaces. I hope you have a wonderful day and take care.